Thanks, Biray. I noticed you didn't say anything about social media, but I'm proud to say that I'm on Twitter and I have 334 followers. Well, Gülay Hocam and my colleagues and friends, I'm delighted to be here with also former graduates. I realize we're running out of time. When Winston Churchill took out his watch, apparently from the floor at the Commons, people were yelling at him, saying, a watch is nothing, you need a calendar. I promise that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to even attempt to switch horses midstream and deviate somewhat from what I was going to cover. I feel nervous that revisiting Strategic Depth, that is the book by our current Prime Minister and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, I call it, I could get myself into trouble, but the Bible of Turkish foreign policy. I was going to bring along a copy of it with me, but it weighed so heavily in my briefcase that I thought I better leave it behind, as I was intending to walk from Penn Station to here. It could be considered as a treatise. The version I bought about 2 years ago is the 59th print of the book and has about 600 pages in it. And I think in academic literature there is recognition that this book has deeply impacted on Turkish foreign policy during his reign as first the advisor to the Prime Minister, Chief Foreign Policy Advisor, and then subsequently as the minister until a couple of months ago. I'm going to say a few words very briefly about what this Strategic Depth book thesis is, how it has manifested itself in Turkish foreign policy, and where it has left us. The good news, I think there is a relationship somewhere towards the end between the way in which Danny has shown us the economy deteriorating and Turkish foreign policy somewhat getting out of control there. In as nutshell as I can squeeze it into what the book argues, and Biray, as she began to introduce this panel, she made references to what the geopolitical changes around the world, how it is impacting on Turkish foreign policy. And that's the point at which I suddenly realized that Strategic Depth was written at a very different time in world politics. It was originally published in 2000, 2001, and clearly written against the background of that first post-Cold War decade. We are clearly living in a very different world, especially in the light of what's been happening in the Middle East, not to mention north of the Black Sea. And that needs to be borne in the back of our minds, I think. So when the book came out, basically its thesis was a criticism of Turkish Republican foreign policy for having been unidimensional, meaning followed the line put forward by the West, in this case NATO and the European Union, and having taken to use to pick with tweezers a term from the book, an Orientalist approach towards the Middle East and the East, having shied away from it, and instead the depth part of the title comes from the argument that Turkey enjoys a historical depth because it has been at the center of historically important events, and lists another 7 or 8 countries, empires that have had the the superiority or the privilege of having been in the midst of these historical events, and these are Britain, France, Germany, China, and a couple of other countries. US is not listed amongst them, incidentally. That gives Turkey a depth, and secondly, its geography gives a depth over even Germany's geography, because of the way in which Turkey has one foot in the Balkans, another one in the Black Sea area, another in the Caucasus, another in the Middle East, and then also a couple of foot that goes beyond that as well, and has by the literature often been linked, associated with, to the dismay of the author himself, with a neo-Ottomanist tendency there. I'm sure I'm not doing justice to the book and the effort that has gone into it, but the policy recommendation that comes out of the book is to move away from Turkey's traditional foreign policy and to become proactive rather than just reactive, proactive in its geography, particularly in the Middle East, and argued also that the qualities, the depthness that Turkey enjoys gives it the quality of being a central country and a country that should be able to shape its neighborhood, the order in the neighborhood. The policy recommendation here, beyond being proactive and trying to shape that environment, is also that Turkey should cease to be seen as a barrier to Soviet expansionism, but as a bridge between the West and what is referred to here as Islamic civilization. How has this policy or doctrine, as some refer to it, been implemented? I think there are three distinct periods. There is the golden age of the implementation of this doctrine, roughly from the days that the author comes to the helms of Turkish foreign policy as an advisor, to August 2011. And August 2011 is a very symbolic date. It refers to the occasion when the author himself has a 7-hour conversation with Bashar al-Assad in Damascus in an effort to persuade him to yield to the advice from Turkey that he should reform and fall in line with democratic and liberal market-oriented policies. From August 2011 to 2014, I call it this period when things have somewhat, dare I say, again I could get myself into trouble, strategic depth turning into some kind of a strategic mess. And what I see is the final stage, an effort to maneuver this huge ship of Turkish foreign policy closer and closer back to the West. And I'll come back to its manifestation. I may be misreading it, but just give me a chance to go back and look into some of the details that suggest that there's an effort to go in that direction. The Golden Age tools were this notion that was adopted, obviously, from U.S. international relations academia, soft power, that what would enable Turkey to, when implementing its proactive foreign policy in the area and bring about change and influence the course of change in its immediate neighborhood, would be its soft power. And what did this soft power, where did it come from? It clearly came from that economic performance that references were made to. And we have to appreciate that that economic performance has to be judged and assessed in relation to its immediate neighborhood rather than, you know, India, Brazil, and other better performing emerging countries beyond that particular neighborhood there. Another aspect of what gave Turkey soft power was its democratic performance. That came clearly with the European Union's engagement. But that engagement was not limited to only democratic reforms, political reforms in Turkey that kind of brought Turkey to the attention of its neighborhood, to the extent that the neighborhood and the West began to talk about Turkey as a model, but Turkey emulating some of the foreign policy tools of the European Union itself. And there's a beautiful quotation from Ibrahim Kalın, who now holds the position that the author of Strategic Debt did, actually making references to the European Union's classic integration tools like free movement of people, free movement of goods, liberalization of visas in Turkey's neighborhood. And that was very much captured in 2010 in a speech by Davutoğlu himself when he made references to this beautiful line of free movement of people and goods from Kars all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And I think that was part also of what was making Turkish foreign policy go through that golden age. Finally, very much related to these European integrationist tools is the rise of the trading state in Turkey. I think one aspect of the economic performance that Danny so skillfully summarized for us, analyzed for us for the last 10, 15 years was the way in which foreign trade began to play a significant role in the Turkish economy. When I was a student at Boğaziçi University, foreign trade constituted or came to roughly 9% of Turkey's GDP. And I can assure you that wearing a pair of jeans on campus at Boğaziçi University was an absolute sign of prestige. It could take you a long way in your social relationships. Whereas today, or by the time we come into the mid-2000s, that proportion comes to almost 50%, just in terms of trade in goods, not including services. If you include services, that becomes even bigger. And in this foreign trade, the neighborhood acquires, in relation to the European Union, a more significant place in Turkey's foreign trade. I mean, trade with the EU continues to grow, but the European Union's place in Turkey's foreign trade drops from 50% in around the year 2000 all the way down to 37, 38% in 2012, 2013, while the neighborhood's percentage increases very significantly there. However, that picture from August 2011 begins to change in a very significant manner. A Turkey that was perceived as a model begins to raise question marks in the minds of decision makers in the neighborhood, but public opinion in the neighborhood and beyond it as well. One strong characteristic of the golden age was Turkey's ability to speak to all parties in its neighborhood. That was captured, as you know, by the term zero problems with neighbors, but also between neighbors, that Turkey made itself a reputation for trying to mediate conflicts in its neighborhood and beyond it. I'm only into 12 minutes or 13 minutes. I mean, I'm doing quite well compared to, dare I say, Çağlar Keyder. And this is discrimination because I'm not popular in social media, I suppose. That image there changes very significantly. I can't go into the details of it, but more and more Turkey is perceived as part and parcel of the problem in the neighborhood in the Middle East, if not in the north as well, as there is growing criticism of the muted response of Turkey towards what Russia has been doing in Ukraine, as it violates one of the major pillars of that foreign policy. That strategic depth was taken so lightly. Where does this leave us, taking stock as we enter into that third period? Security threats in Turkey's neighborhood are increasing and increasingly risk spilling into Turkey itself. I can't go into that into the details. A second aspect is captured by this concept that was created to try to make up for the golden age, called precious loneliness, that to explain why Turkey is left in a very awkward situation in the neighborhood is attributed to Turkey's high ethical standards and an effort to stand by injustices. A third aspect is the trading state beginning to run against itself, and its foreign trade starting to take a dent as well. I would have liked to go into the details of why did this happen, why was there a golden age and then a period where Turkish foreign policy lost its status, soft power status, and its image as a model. I'm skipping it, but instead focusing where I think things are moving. Things, or the direction of foreign policy, Turkish foreign policy, I think is making an attempt to go back to where it used to be in the 90s and early 2000s. This is driven simply by the chaos in the neighborhood. It is driven by public opinion's response to that chaos. When you look at the GMF's, German Marshall Fund's, yearly transatlantic trend surveys, you see the way in which suddenly, out of the blue, support in Turkey for the European Union has begun to increase. Much more surprisingly, support for NATO has been increasing. And that pattern has also been captured by surveys in Turkey, especially the survey that is annually run by Kadir Has University on foreign policy. But I think the development that is having the most categorical impact on this effort to turn towards the West is trade. I was very much taken back when one of the advisors, I won't name the name, I could get myself into trouble, but Danny had a slide where the name was mentioned. That person was in Washington, D.C., arguing that a new economic axis was emerging in the neighborhood along Turkey and Russia. Whereas when you look at Turkish foreign trade statistics from 2013 to 2014, Turkey's exports, which is critical for the economy and ameliorating that current accounts deficits, to Russia, to Iran, to Egypt, to Libya, to a number of countries has been going down, and it's been going down significantly. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation here, but I could share the numbers if there's an interest in it. Whereas, very embarrassingly, trade exports to Israel has increased, and it has increased by 25%. And Turkish exports to Israel is equal to half of Turkey's exports to Russia, even though the Russian population is like 35 times bigger than Israel, and its economy is bigger as many times as well. Turkish exports to the European Union, to an ailing European Union, and remember how Professor Dr. Burhan Kuzu treated a progress report from the European Commission and also Egemen Bağış's lines, has increased by around 10%, while to Russia it's been going up. Similarly, exports to the United States has been increasing too. I think that is what is also pushing Turkey in that direction, and this is what I attribute in this deep interest on the Turkish government's part in wanting to be part of the negotiations for the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which has not occurred, but instead, in a very surprising way, Turkey and the European Commission have agreed to upgrade Turkey's customs union. To me, this is a strategically very important development, and the European Commission has gone off to try to get a mandate from its membership. So the choice here is between economically realigning yourself with your old allies that was a source of criticism in strategic depth, or going towards the Euro-Asian Customs Union, and I won't even go and bother you with the details of how European Customs Union, Euro-Asian Customs Union is going to significantly undermine Turkey's markets in the post-Soviet, in the former Soviet world. And that's where I will leave things.